Good afternoon, everybody. Jason here with AVPro and Murideo. I want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. This is going to be a fun one. We're going to be talking about some future technology and high resolution 8K. Some of that will tie into HDMI 2.1 as well. And to clear up some of the confusion about 8K and why it's going to be so great, I will have a special guest on today, Florian. Florian Friedrich has been in our industry for over 20 years. He works a lot in post-production and things like that and deals a lot with HDR and now 8K, and he's made some videos in the past used for demonstration and test material. So he's going to be a very valuable guest for us today. We'll learn a lot from him. So again, thank you guys for being here. I am going to be watching the chat box throughout the presentation. I also have Tom Devine from AVPro. He'll be watching the chat box as well. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat box. I'll be checking periodically. Tom should be answering most questions as they go, but in the chance that neither one of us get to your question as the presentation continues on, I will leave some time at the end for any extra questions. And if we do run out of time completely, I'll provide you guys with my email address, and you can keep the dialogue going and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So let's take a quick look at come on, there we go. Okay, here we go. AVPro Global Holdings. If you guys are new to our webinars, welcome. If you have attended in the past, thank you for joining again. AVPro Global Holdings is a company based out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We make a whole bunch of different things for HDMI connectivity and test equipment and HDMI cables, and we do training, all kinds of cool stuff. Most of you are probably familiar with our AVPro Edge brand. That's going to include all of our matrix switchers, extenders, scalers, all of our installation and connectivity tools. We do also have the brand Murideo, which is tied to HDMI test equipment, troubleshooting, lots of calibration type things. We do have our own line of HDMI cables, which we do manufacture, called Bullet Train. They're great cables. We've got some really cool stuff to show you in regards to the cables today. And then last but not least, our custom programming system is called Canvas. We do a lot of custom programming for our matrix switches and for home theater systems and for commercial jobs as well. So a little bit about us. My name is Jason Dustle, as I said before. I have been in the industry for about 20 years. This is a fun job for me. I don't count it as work sometimes. In fact, most of the time, we do travel around quite a bit. We teach classes on AV and distribution in 4K. We teach a lot on calibration with ISF. We join up with Greg Lowen at the PVA Professional Video Alliance. We join up with Jerry LeMay at the Home Acoustic Alliance, and our job is to help teach audio, video, calibration all over the place. I've been with AVPro now. I just celebrated my 2-year anniversary. With AVPro, we've been around since 2011. We started off as an online store, basically. You could go to the avprostore.com and you could buy different products from different vendors. As we were doing this, we saw a giant hole in the market, especially with 4K and HDR and 18 gigs. So going back to 2015, we have been in that world and we've been doing very, very well with it. If you guys have had experience with our company before, give us a call, see what's up. We'd love to talk to you about distribution and what you're doing for calibration. And we have a great tech support department. If you guys have any problems, you've called us before, you've probably dealt with some of our tech support people before. We've got some folks in there that are CTS certified and do a great job of helping people in the field if they're stuck on a job. So a little bit about us, a little bit about me. Let's skip into the presentation. Okay, so 8K. Today we're going to talk about what 8K is, why it's going to be important. There are some differences this time. When we went from 1080p to 4K, it was actually pretty simple. It was just a matter of more pixels. A couple years later, we introduced HDR and wide color gamut, so that was a whole new format change. We are going to be going with a higher resolution in 8K, but there's some really interesting things about it. It's not just more pixels, it's smarter pixels as well. So I'll talk about that a little bit, and we'll talk to Florian a little bit about that too, about what he's seeing on his end of things. So how is 8K going to change things? Well, we've got some interesting numbers here for you. I do want to point out that there was an article released recently from, I can't remember who published it, but it was about LG, and they're opening a brand new plant, and that plant is going to be dedicated to oversized OLEDs. And as you guys have seen in the past couple of years, screens are getting bigger and bigger, and now the resolutions are getting higher enough to actually show off a big screen without seeing pixels. I remember seeing giant rear projection big screen TVs in Circuit City as a kid, and none of them ever looked very good until you were really close to it. I remember a 90-inch flat panel TV from a few years ago that was only 1080p. Again, you had to be 15 feet from it before it looked pretty good. 8K is going to be the opposite of that. We're going to be able to go really big on our screens. We're going to be able to sit really close. And because of some of the smart upscaling and the artificial intelligence upscaling, we're not going to be able to see pixels. We're going to have a nice smooth image regardless of the original content being 2K, 4K, or whatever. The demand for 80-inch and up screens is up quite a bit right now. 2018, they saw an uptick of 55% in sales in oversized screens. This year, it was even more. It was 60% so far for 2019. So the demand for big screens is getting, and the big screens also are coming down in price. We're starting to see 77-inch OLEDs that are 4K that are down in the $5,000 range. We're starting to see some large 8K TVs. We saw some at Infocom and CEDIA this year, and of course at CES in the next few months, we're going to see lots of cool stuff there as well. What I really like about going with a really high resolution like this is now we have the ability to sit nice and close to the screen to get that big immersed feeling without actually seeing pixel structure. That's typically what we consider the point of failure, is when you can see pixels. So imagine being able to sit closer in the theater with still having a very good, clear picture. That's kind of what we're going for here. Again, the upscaling is excellent in 8K. It's not just your traditional doubling of the pixels. We're actually going to be looking at a smarter way of upscaling, and Florian will talk about that a little bit too. Also with 8K, we're going to see some new frame rates. If you're a gamer or if you're into sports, you should be very excited about 120 frames per second. That's going to give us some of the smoothest images we've ever seen before. The hockey puck will no longer skip across the ice. It'll go nice and smooth, just like in real life. And that's really what we're going for, guys, when we get into these really high resolutions, really high dynamic range, wide color gamuts, high bit depths. I've heard people say this so many times over the years that looking at the TV almost seems like you're looking out of a window. I've heard that since the 1080i days. But we're actually getting close to that now. Will we ever see everything on TV like we do in the real world? I don't know, but we're making massive strides and we're getting closer and closer, which is really cool. I'm starting to see colors in movies and TV shows now that I've never seen before. It's a really cool place to be right now in this industry. We're also going to talk today about how you're planning on handling 8K. Most of the people on the call today are probably integrators. And we're going to talk a lot about infrastructure, and I've got some cables to show off for you. I've got a new signal generator to show off for you. So we're already dipping our toes into the 8K world. We want you guys to be ready for that as well. 8K will require a lot more bandwidth than 4K and especially 2K. So we'll give you some tips on building your infrastructure and making sure that that client that you're servicing is future resistant, at least to a point. Current specs call for 18 gigs per second. That's the HDMI 2.0 spec. We're going to be looking at 24 gigs as a stepping stone, and then eventually 48 gigs. HDMI 2.1 does support up to 48 gigs. Your current infrastructure that you could be dealing with today might only be 10.2 gigs, especially if your infrastructure consists of category cable with something like HDBaseT, for example. So a lot of things to think about to get us to 48 gigs. But again, we'll talk about some of that and give you some tips on how to get ready for it. So we're at HDMI 2.0 currently. 2.1 is going to allow us to get into some higher resolutions. There is a 5K red cam out there right now. There's lots of 8K stuff. There is going to be the Tokyo Olympics in 2020 will be broadcast in 8K. We're seeing some numbers as high as 10K right now. The spec actually supports up to 10K. Seeing some 5K and 10K resolutions in widescreen, I think is going to be awesome. But that's going to take a lot more bandwidth than 18 gigs. So again, the new standard for HDMI 2.1 is going to be 48 gigs. I want to show you guys some numbers here to let you know and let you see exactly what's going on here. Looks like we may have a question already. Let me check the chat box really quickly. And, oh, nope, maybe I just read that wrong. Okay, no big deal. We'll continue on. So, as you guys know, where we are right now is right around here somewhere. HDMI 2.0 was released or at least announced in September of 2013. We've been going pretty hard with it since 2014 and 2015 with HDMI 2.0 and 18 gigs. We've already hit the limit. We already have one movie that if we were to take full advantage of the movie and get the best picture quality out of it, we're over the 18 gig mark so far. So you know, as quickly as 18 gigs came, it seems like we're going to be past it very, very quickly here. November 2017, we saw the introduction of HDMI 2.1. That's when a lot of us got really excited, because some of the limitations we had in HDMI 2.0, we're going to blow those away with HDMI 2.1. And then, of course, 48 gigs is going to be the end goal. That's going to be completely compressed, uncompressed, I'm sorry, HDMI 2.1, up to 12 bits, up to 10K, up to 120 frames per second. So lots and lots of good things happening here, but it will cost a lot of bandwidth and it will cost a lot of data, which is why it's going to be so important to get your systems ready. I just want to show you a quick picture here of the differences from 1080p all the way up to 10K. You'll notice that with full HD, 1920 by 1080, that's going to be you know, traditional 1.77, you know, 16 by 9 aspect ratio. You get into some of these higher resolutions, and we're going to have a native 2.37, 2.39 aspect ratio. So for folks who are really into cinema and film and movies, and they want high res and widescreen natively without the use of extra lenses or extra processing, we're going to see some of that stuff here pretty soon, which is very, very exciting. Just want to give you guys a quick shot and look at what that's going to look like for us here coming up in the future. So why exactly can we not do everything that we want in HDMI 2.0? Well, let's think about how the disk is encoded. If the disk is encoded with 4K, 60 frames per second, and 10-bit with HDR, the disk is going to have 420 chroma subsampling on it, or color on it. You know, and there are some cases where you might want 444 color. The problem is if we want 444, 60, 4K with 10 bits with HDR coming out of our player or our source, that puts us at 22.2 gigs, which is well over the 18 gig spec. And this is why we need more bandwidth. Now, the trade-off here, excuse me, the trade-off here is, you know, I could lower the resolution to 1080, but why would I want to do that? It's 4K, especially on the disk. The frame rate, 60 frames per second. If that's a video game or a Hollywood movie like the Billy Lynn Long Halftime Walk movie, that movie has a specific look to it, and seeing it at 60 frames per second and adds to how the movie's supposed to look. So I'm not going to want to take the 60 frames per second and make that anything lower. It's not going to be as smooth. It's going to introduce some judder into the picture. I could get away with keeping the chroma subsampling at 420, but maybe I have a really good Blu-ray player that is good at upsampling. So if we want 444 uncompressed color, we don't want to make any sacrifices there. In most cases where the sacrifice happens is in the bit depth. So if we look at that Billy Lynn movie and test the output of the player while that movie's playing natively, it actually ends up coming out as 8-bit. So that doesn't quite give us the real HDR impact that we're looking for. They introduce some banding artifacts into the image, especially when you look at like a blue sky in the background during a daytime scene. You know, the last thing we want is for this nice, pretty picture to have big, deep blue banding in the background. So again, we can't have everything that we want in the current infrastructure. We need more. We need more bandwidth. So if we want to get more dynamic range, more color, higher bit depths, higher resolution, 4K, 8K, of course we need more bandwidth. I want you guys to see some numbers from Cedia. And when we look at this chart, this is going to give us an idea of where systems are right now and really what the point of failure is. Let's take a quick look at this chart first. This is from AVPro Edge. This is from our website. Feel free to check it out if you'd like to maybe screenshot this or keep it with you. That's totally fine. We've been dealing with in the past several years everything up in this upper category. You know, 1080, 24 frames per second, 8-bit. You know, this is all low bandwidth stuff, so it was never really an issue until now. A few years ago, here's where people started to get in trouble. The second you add 4K with 12-bit with HDR, that puts us over 10 gigs, and this is where we had a big problem with infrastructure going back a few years. We've done these webinars in the past, and it's funny how it all comes full circle. You know, we were having the same exact conversation a few years ago about 10 gigs and 14 gigs and 18 gigs. So it's all happening again. It's nothing new if you've been around for a while. If we want better pictures, we need more bandwidth. Take a look down here at the Billy Lynn movie. This was actually coming out of the Blu-ray player on the Billy Lynn movie. We were able to check these specs and check the stats with our Murideo 6A analyzer. But if that movie comes out of the player, 60 frames per second, 4K, with uncompressed color, with HDR, with wide color, in order for us to make that movie play in that system, we had to bring the bit depth down to 8 bits. So again, we introduced banding into the sky, and our color fidelity is not as good as it could be. Where we're looking at going forward is here. These numbers came from Cedia. We start looking at 4K 60, 10-bit, and again, we're at 22 gigs. If we want to go to 12-bit, which the system can handle in HDMI 2.1, that puts us at 26 gigs. So we see the need now for 24 and 48 gigs. If we were to do 4K 60 at 12-bit, that already puts us over 24 gigs. Now, if we up the resolution to a DCI 4K or to 5K or to 8K or to 10K, you can see where these numbers get out of hand really quickly. In fact, we have to cut it off right about here if we start talking about 48 gigs. If we go 8K, 60, 8-bit, 10-bit with uncompressed color, that puts us into the 70, 80, 90, 100 gig range. This is way for the future, guys. This might be HDMI 2.2 or something. Maybe it's going to be HDMI 3.0. Maybe it'll be the next version. But you guys can see everything that's possible inside of HDMI 2.0, assuming 60 frames per second. I think Cedia made this chart at 60 frames per second just to keep it as kind of a constant. TV shows and video games and movies, I think we're going to see a lot of 60 frames per second here pretty soon. Now, going beyond that, we've got this chart for you as well. This chart's a little more drilled down as far as like showing you different frame rates and the bandwidth requirements. So if we take a look at something like 4K 60, 444, 10-bit, that puts us at 20 gigs. We up the frame rate to 4K 120, which is I think is going to be a very viable format going forward. I believe we'll see some of that in sports, especially. In fact, before today's webinar started, at least the afternoon session, I saw a tweet from somebody with DirecTV saying that there's going to be a bunch of NBA basketball games in 4K HDR next year. So that's pretty exciting stuff. But we start getting into 4K 120, depending on your bit depth and your chroma subsampling. Again, we're already at this like 48 gig pipeline, but being able to put so much more data through the signal is going to give us some really nice pictures going forward. We go into the really high numbers. This is stuff that's way into the future. We start seeing some things like if we want 10K 120 at 10 bits, that puts us at 100 gigs. I don't see that happening anytime soon. This may be something that we look at when we're looking at wall-sized TVs 5-10 years from now. But these numbers are already kind of specced out. The math's already been done. And you can see where we might be in the future with maybe augmented reality or virtual reality, or again, just wall-sized TVs where people are multitasking and doing several things at once. We get up into these 100, 120 gig numbers. And like I said, this is way to the future. I don't think we'll see this anytime soon, but the numbers are written and the specs are there. So what you're seeing a picture of here on the right side of the screen, if you were able to make the last CES in Denver, this was the 8K 88-inch LG OLED, which was a big splash at the show. I went and took a look at it myself. It looked awesome. The content was mostly landscapes and nature. It was impressive. I'm picky, and I can be a little critical when it comes to these things, but especially seeing 8K for the first time, not really understanding how good the upscaling was and how clean the picture looked with 8K. It was very impressive. Especially adding higher frame rates. There's a demo going around somewhere of a model train track at 120 frames per second, and I believe it's in 4K if I'm not mistaken, but it feels like you can reach in and pick up the little toy train. And again, going back to what I said before about all this stuff looking more and more like real life, I mean, we're getting really close. These TVs, of course, are at a premium price, just like any new TV of its kind. But I would expect to see some of these TVs sub $10,000 in the next couple of years. And when you have these clients who want the biggest and the best, 10 grand for a TV is not that crazy. I remember Pioneer plasmas at 40 grand, and the 77-inch OLED that's out right now was I think 15 or 20 when it first came out. So just like anything else in our world, guys, just give it a little time. Prices will come down and things will get more affordable. And next thing you know, you'll be installing them all the time, just like you are probably with 4K TVs now. So how is HDMI 2.1 done? This I thought was absolutely genius. Without having to reinvent the wheel, here's how they were able to squeeze more bandwidth out of these cables and out of the system. The important leads inside the HDMI cable, the most important ones are what we call the TMDS lines. They're typically labeled 0, 1, and 2. There's a fourth TMDS line that's typically reserved for the clock channel. And basically what that means is, think about when you have all that data coming through the cable, 18 billion ones and zeros all arriving really, really, really fast speeds. There has to be something that keeps the ones and zeros in line So they're not all coming in at once, and things aren't getting jumbled up, and we're not getting problems with like a no picture or distortion in the picture. So what they've done here, traditional HDMI has always had 3 TMDS lines with a 4th clock channel. So the 3 TMDS lines are what's bringing all the audio and the video information over the cable. What they did with HDMI 2.1 is they took this 4th TMDS line, which was typically reserved as the clock channel to keep everything in time, and they've repurposed this as another data channel. They repurposed the TMDS lines to double as the clock channel as well. So they're embedding the clock channel into the TMDS lines, which allowed them to open up a 4th line. So I thought it was pretty genius. This may have been done by design. They may have been thinking about this way into the future when HDMI was new way back in the day, but this is how they're able to do it. Everything else from here, though, is still the same. You still have your hot plug and your DDC channels that carry some of your commands and ARC and things like that, HDCP and things like that. But that's how they're able to do it. A couple of notes I wanted to bring up. If you guys remember back to about 2012 or 13, Sony released their brand new 4K TV. We weren't quite in HDR land yet or wide color gamut land yet, but we were in 4K resolution. And just like with 8K, there wasn't really any readily available content. So Sony was always shipping, and they even had it optional to purchase a little 4K media streamer box that you'd hook up to the TV, and that's where all the 4K content would live. And of course, you fast forward just a little bit of time, and now we've got 4K stuff all over Netflix and Amazon, and we have plenty of discs and things like that as well. So expect at the beginning of this, there may be some sort of like media player or something like that is going to be able to give us these high-res images. There was an article recently, and the 8K Association said that there are currently no plans to see 8K on a disc in physical media format. So I think that it's not going to be, they said they may not. So we might see 8K on a disc, we might not, who knows. I think that it's going to be mainly reserved for streaming and maybe like a hard drive type of situation, but that's where we're at with it right now. There is some 8K content floating around right now, not a ton of it, but it will come. Florian, when we talk to him a little bit later in the presentation, he's got some awesome NASA 8K footage available on his website if you want to download it and stuff like that and check it out on an 8K TV. It's pretty cool. Now, one thing that we wanted to do to stay ahead of the game, which is what we like to do traditionally with AVPro, is we developed a 48 gig HDMI fiber optic hybrid cable. We've dealt with what we call the AOC, active optical cable. We've dealt with those now for a few years, but they've always been limited to 18 gigs. This year at CEDIA, we had a 48 gig, 100 meter cable passing a 8K signal to an 8K Sony TV. I walked around the floor and I did not see anybody else that was doing anything like that. So the fact that you could hit the display button on the Sony TV and get the 8K resolution confirmation, it was pretty cool. It was pretty mind-blowing. Also, that cable's not powered externally. We do a cool little trick with the 5 volt coming from the source, and we're able to amplify the signal with the 5 volt. So you will notice that the ends of these cables are a little bigger than traditional. There is a chipset in there that's converting converting the photons to electrons and vice versa. With that being said, the cable is directional, so make sure that the cable is going in the right end. You can't see it on this picture, but if you flip the head ends over, you will see that they're labeled source and display. Just make sure if you're using those cables that you are putting them in the right direction. Currently on the website, I believe we have a couple of lengths for sale, and we do have the rest of them that are going to be released here pretty soon, but up to 100 meters with 48 gigs without having external power, pretty cool and very, very impressive. Now, there's not a lot of sources. In fact, there's no sources I can think of right now. A lot of people were asking us, like, how are you doing this, especially during the CEDIA show? Having our own engineers is very powerful for us, because we can do things like build a generator or build a source. So, it was very, very kind of put together. There was no chassis. It was at the board level at that point, but it was making an 8K signal, and that was pretty cool to be able to verify it. A little bit more about the cables. These are the kind of things that I'd be pre-wiring with right now if I was preparing myself for the future. They do support, of course, 48 gigs up to 120 frames per second. Some of the great things that come with HDMI 2.1, like variable refresh rate, eARC, we're going to include all that for you as well. There is a built-in Ethernet channel if you guys are still doing that. In-wall rated for you guys who live in those states where you have to have that CL2 or CL3 rating. These are all in-wall rated. They can pass 3D, because I know there's still some 3D stuff out there. So these are really high-end cables. They're going to be able to provide any kind of signal you want for now into the future. I do like the fact that these cables, because they have 4 pieces of clear line fiber in them, let's say that we are talking 110 gigs or something like that in the future, maybe HDMI 4.0. When you need that much bandwidth in the future, what's great about these cables, because of the clear line fiber that's in them, you can literally cut the cable off right here and cut the head end off and re-terminate those fiber cables and use some sort of balun or converter for fiber back to HDMI. So, running something like this now is going to kind of help you in the future. What I'd be doing right now if I were building a home, I'd be pre-wiring with a cable like this, probably also a straight fiber cable, maybe like an OM3 type of cable, because I don't want to tear the house apart every 5, 7, 10 years just because there's a change in the format. And as I'll always say, I'm a huge fan of conduit. The last thing I want to do is try to replace a cable once it's buried in the wall and the wall has made of concrete or something like that. So conduit's a real lifesaver when it does come to building your infrastructure more robust in the future. It's just a matter of using the old cable to pull through the new cable, and it makes your life as an installer much, much, much easier. So what else are we doing for 8K? We did talk about the Murideo 7G generator on our last webinar. We did have it on display at CEDIA, and we were showing off some of the new features. Guys, this is a killer piece of equipment. It's going to allow you to calibrate not only the video, but also the audio. It is, as far as I know, the only Dolby approved audio generator on the market. So you can do things like Atmos and do your calibration and do your testing for Atmos. This is going to be an excellent piece of equipment if you're a TV manufacturer, if you're a calibrator, if you're working in systems where you're having to do some troubleshooting. There's some really cool things in here, like an audio video lip sync test. So when you get that call from the customer that says, hey, the lips don't match up with the voice, this comes with this nice cool little photo diode that you stick on the screen. It comes with a little microphone that you put next to the speaker, and the machine itself will tell you exactly how your latency is performing. So now you can go back to your AVR or your matrix switch perhaps and adjust your audio delay there. So there's no guesses. It tells you exactly how fast or slow it is. A couple more things about it that I want to mention. The reason we're talking about 8K is out of the box, the 7G generator will be a 18 gig HDMI 2.0 device. Now we are offering an upgrade path to get it to 2.1 and 8K. So the retail out of the gate on the 2.0 machine is $49.99 US retail price. If you pre-order that now, you can, for $1,000, you can pre-order the upgrade for HDMI 2.1. So when HDMI 2.1 comes and we have everything ready to go, all you'll have to do is box up your 7G generator, send it to us, and we'll do the upgrade for you, and we'll send it back to you ready for HDMI 2.1 and 8K and 10K going forward. So again, right out of the bat, it's a $5,000 piece, but if you go ahead and do the pre-order with the upgrade's only cost you $1,000, and then you'll be fully ready for 48 gigs and 8K and all the cool stuff that we've been talking about today. One other thing I want to mention about it too, don't want to forget this, the test patterns inside the 7G generator. There are tons of test patterns. We have the ISF test patterns. We have the Digital Video Essentials, Diversified Video Solutions test patterns from Ryan Maciolo. Those are all built in as well. The Bill Wetzel test patterns are all built in as well. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of test patterns built into the machine. There's also a handful of video clips built into the machine as well. There is a 1 terabyte hard drive. So if you do wanted to upload your own video clips for demo material, maybe you want to upload your own test patterns. I like to do that myself. You have a terabyte of space inside of the generator to upload and do whatever you want, which I think is awesome. So how are we going to be able to pass 8K through an existing system? So right now it's really hard to test because there's no sources or repeaters that support 8K. So we don't quite know some of these answers yet. But what we do know is that new infrastructure might be necessary. Go ahead and do your pre-wires with the 48 gig cables, or go ahead and do your pre-wires with the fiber, because you can always use the balun and convert the signal from fiber back over to HDMI. And as I mentioned before, and I will forever, conduit, conduit, conduit. If you are putting in category cable still, that's okay. If it's going through a piece of conduit, it's easy to pull through in the future. What we don't know quite yet, and Florian may be able to clear some of this up for us as well, is there may be some really excellent compression method that maybe even is not invented yet, to be able to get 8K down to a lower bandwidth. But we don't know. You know, this is brand new. It's there's still a lot of questions and a lot of answers to be had. The more I learn about it, the more questions I have myself. But just some tips that I would give you for now is just to prepare yourself. You know, it's just like cooking, right? It's all in the prep work. So if you do good prep work when it comes to doing upgrades later in the future, it just makes your life much easier. Should you be selling should you be selling 8K now? I would say yes. The TVs are there. The upscaling is amazing. Customers love it. They've done focus groups. People can't see pixels. They can sit really close. This is going to be a very cool thing for us to see. It's not going anywhere. You saw the numbers on the demand for for bigger screen sizes. The demand for 8K is there. Stuff is being shot in 8K. We're going to see the Tokyo Olympics next year in 8K. There's rumors about the PS5 being 8K. So again, just keep your customers future resistant. You don't want to tear the house apart every few years, like I mentioned before. So let's get them ready now. Looks like there may be a question. Let me check the chat box. Okay, cool. John had asked how much the generator was, and it looks like Tom answered you. John, thank you, Tom. Very good. Okay, moving along. So what are we looking for in the future? I mentioned before that LG has dedicated an entire new plant to oversized OLEDs. They plan on doing 10 million panels annually by 2022. That's a lot of TVs. We're seeing at these trade shows these gigantic wall-sized TVs. What you see in the upper right there was a picture from Infocom in Orlando earlier this year with the Sony Crystal LED. We've been seeing that display since, gosh, I want to say CEDIA of last year or maybe CES of this year. So it's been around for a while. I know they've sold a couple. A lot of people complain about 8K, we don't need it. A lot of people are still saying we don't need 4K. But when you have a screen this big, guys, it really is necessary. You can sit pretty close to this thing and still not see pixels. So imagine you've got a wall-sized screen where you can do lots of multitasking. It's perfect black like an OLED because it is micro LED. Those LEDs can shut off when parts of the picture are supposed to be dark. You've got a nice big wide color gamut. You've got a very high dynamic range. Maybe some of these things are hitting 1,000 nits. So imagine like a really good OLED the size of your wall. Very, very cool stuff. Samsung has their micro LED wall in China right now. It's a 34-foot wide screen in a movie theater. So having something that large, that's that bright, with that high of a resolution is really, really cool. The other thing we're seeing a lot now too, LG Display has been working very hard on these transparent OLEDs. We're seeing them installed in mirrors where you might be really close to the screen. We're seeing them installed in condos where you might have a wall of windows. You can turn that window into a screen if you want to. So we need high res, we need high dynamic range, we need wide color gamut if we're going to be fighting that much ambient light, especially in a condo type situation. Anybody who's messed with VR, you probably noticed, I haven't dived too deep into VR, but I have used some of those little, you put the goggles on your head and you put your phone in the goggles, and those still bug me quite a bit because I can see pixels. It looks like I'm looking through a screen door. So I'm kind of lusting for higher resolution in that case. I know there are some high res options out there. They're very pricey, but getting the AR and the VR stuff to a higher resolution, I think it's going to really help the experience with people who've used it before. So our special guest, Mr. Florian, let me double check here and make sure he's ready to go. Give me just a second. And there's Florian. Okay, Florian, we should hear you in just a moment. And there you are.
I'm online. Can you hear me?
Fantastic, and I can hear you just fine, Florian. How you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Sure,
Pleasure.
absolutely, man. Thanks for being here. I know it's a little late for you in Germany, right?
It's 9 o'clock and 9:30 in the evening, but that's
Cool.
fine.
Good, good. I wanted everybody to get to know you a little bit. I wanted to talk about some of the stuff you've been working on. As I was doing a little bit of research for this presentation, I came across your latest article about 8K being hype or being really the real deal. And I thought to myself, I mean, Florian would be the perfect person to have on the webinar to talk about this stuff. So for the people who might be on the webinar who aren't familiar with you and your work, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and some of the stuff you've worked on?
Sure, thank you. I've had a test laboratory called AVTop for about 20 years. We've been doing tests and reviews for publishers in Germany, and somehow this business transformed to now my consulting business. It's my company is now FF Pictures, and FF Pictures is providing software to post-production houses, plugins for color grading and color science, converting HDR and SDR formats, those kind of things. I'm doing test patterns. I'm consulting productions, especially 8K and HDR right now. Because that's the biggest topic. And of course, I'm doing test and demonstration materials.
That's
So
great.
8K is really something that has been with me since like 2015. I started 8K in 2015 with a Sony f/65 camera. That's actually a camera that has 8K times 2K resolution. So it's not like the latest and greatest cameras in terms of resolution, but they're still way above 4K. So you made a point of we are seeing more and more cameras with like 5K and 8K
Sure.
resolution, and I can see that in the post-production world as well. People in the post-production world like these cameras for different reasons. We have to see this is a chain. You know, the chain starts at the image acquisition, where people use a camera and record their motion picture, and then there's the post-production, the delivery, and finally the display. Now, with all of these different stages in a workflow, 8K has some advantages. So when it comes to recording, for example, then the big advantage is that you can like stabilize the image, that you can zoom in, things like that, and you don't have these pixel structures. The ultimate goal for 8K, I would say, is to get rid of pixel structures.
Yeah.
So
There's something very cool about that, especially I've had experience so far with the Sony Z series, that's 8K, the Samsung QLED and the LG OLED, and there's something very impressive and almost sci-fi about being able to be this close to the screen and not see pixels. It seems like the future is here in that regards. There was a flat panel manufacturer, I want to say it was around 2009 or 10, you might remember it, but they made a 90-inch LCD that was 1080p. And I remember seeing it in retail, and if you were anywhere closer than 10 feet to it, you could see pixels. It was
of course.
pretty rough. Big, nice screen, but you had to be really far away from it for it to look good.
Yeah, so this myth about, you know, you have to be far away you have to be close to an 8K screen. You know, it's basically a prejudice. That's something that I'm trying to make clear in my article. We don't need to sit much closer to the screen in order to see some benefit of 8K. Of course, we can sit closer. That's no question. And you know, we sit closer and we still don't see pixels. But when it comes to viewing distances, then of course we should sit somewhere equally to the center of a theater. And that means we should sit in a viewing distance that is not before and not in front of like the first row in a theater or after the last row in a theater, in order to have our like perfect ideal 45 degrees would be an ideal field of view, by the way, to have our ideal movie impression or experience.
Where do you like to sit in the theater when you go? Personally,
center.
dead center, halfway back. I
Yeah,
go a smidge further back than dead
yeah,
center.
yes,
Maybe just a
not
couple
closer.
rows, maybe.
I agree.
But 100% dead center of the screen. If I'm
Yes,
in one of the wings or something, I'll pick another time or another day to go to.
exactly.
Especially, you know, we're lucky. We have 2 Dolby theaters here in my area. So, you know, I can look pretty far in advance
You
and
mean
see what
Dolby
seats are
Vision?
sold. Yeah, we've got one over in Tampa, and then we've got
Hmm.
another one in a small town north of me in a little town called Oldsmar, which is almost to Clearwater. So yeah, we're lucky enough to have two near me. So you know, Black Panther I saw in Dolby Vision in the theater. I saw the Joker in Dolby Vision in the theater.
Oh, I saw
I
that
mean,
as well. Yeah.
it's unreal. I mean, not only the resolution being so good, but I've never seen those deep blacks in a theater before, and I have certainly never seen that kind of color saturation, especially in dark scenes. There's a scene in Black Panther. Are you familiar with the movie?
No, I haven't seen that one, but Joker I did.
Yeah, yeah. So in Black Panther, and for those of you who are listening to this, I would highly, highly, highly recommend picking that film up for demonstration purposes when you want to blow your customers away. There's a fight scene in a nightclub, and one of the characters is wearing like a red, like a very deep saturated red dress, and in the dark nightclub, her dress is still a dark saturated red. And having dark saturated or deep saturated colors in dark scenes is very difficult, as you know. So seeing that at home, I kind of expect on an OLED or something, but seeing that projected in the theater was totally mind blowing. I was like, this is crazy. It's super cool.
There's a side note on theater quality compared to home quality, and
Oh, sure.
so you know, there's always this big question about when will we have 8K content, and
Hmm.
when will movies be produced in 8K. So first of all, when we look at what the studios have as a source, or even as a delivery to the theater, they use 444 chroma subsampling. So our deliveries are 420,
Right.
which means there are so all deliveries, all whatever, Netflix,
It's all
Amazon,
420. Yep.
Ultra HD Blu-ray, everything is 420. So the chroma upsampling has to be done, and there's always let's say a lack of resolution compared to the same kind of resolution in a theater. We should not forget this because we need a better 420 in order to achieve the lower resolution 444.
So
Just as a side note.
it almost seems like with more pixels, you can do better upsampling and better scaling because you have more
Yeah.
pixels to work with.
Yes, yes. It's a lot of 8K is about quantization and reducing the artifacts of non-proper quantization. We have to deal with all factors of Nyquist, you know, of chroma subsampling, and of course the pixel structures itself. So geometric and aspects from the engineering side of things. So we want to get rid of pixels, and in order to get rid of the pixels, in order to not see them anymore, to see smooth edges, we have to have more pixels on the screen. And there's one example. By the way, many people say, "Oh, we don't have sources for 8K,"
Right.
but now, but now consider your mobile phone. How many megapixels do you have on your mobile phone?
Oh, sure. I mean, I don't remember the exact number, but it's a Google Pixel 2 XL. So it's got a very, very good camera on it. I'm sure the megapixel count on it's 13, 14, something crazy like that, maybe even
Okay,
more.
so let's consider you only have 10, even if you
Yeah.
only have 10 megapixels.
Hmm.
And in a normal landscape mode, you have 8 megapixels on a 4K screen.
Right.
So you already have more. Now
Right.
let's consider the portrait mode. And so if you do a picture upside, you know, like this,
Hmm.
and then you have black bars
Right.
on both sides. So actually, less than 3 megapixels remain. Uh, I mean, we all have digital images that have much higher resolution than our 4K TVs.
Sure.
So I personally, as being a fan of photography, I like 8K TVs a great deal, even with the material that I have, and like in a private life.
Right. Yeah, and that's an excellent call out too, because not only do we have way more pixels on the phone than we do on the TV, but we're also looking at a what is this, a 5.5 inch screen versus a 65-inch screen or a 55-inch screen. So it's on the phone, it's more pixels, higher pixel density, smaller screen, and we just want to do that at home now on the 65-inch TV. That's all, or the 80-inch TV, or the 120-inch TV.
That is exactly right. This retina kind of resolution, meaning that we have more pixels than our eye can resolve, is a very good thing, because it helps us to make these pixel structures disappear. These pixel structures are bad for like a 3D impression, a depth impression. When you have these jagged edges, you know, where an edge is like a stair and
Right.
not like a smooth edge,
Sure.
then everything looks more two-dimensional and
Hmm.
artificial. So in order to achieve a realistic look, it makes a lot of sense to have some higher pixel counts. And even if the pixel count is only in the TV and not in the source, we'll see benefits.
If you were to take like the number 8, right, and look at it very closely on the screen, the edges are going to be jagged and have the stair steps, as you mentioned before. Well, if the stair steps are like this, but there's more pixels, then the stair steps get so small they probably don't look like stair steps anymore. Now it's nice and smooth to make the circles
Exactly.
that make the number 8, right?
Exactly. The trick is to have so many small rectangles that your eye cannot resolve it. So actually, the goal is that the pixels, the individual pixels, cannot be resolved anymore by your human eye.
Right.
And I have some on my website. I have some calculators, you know, where you can calculate the amount of pixel that is needed according to your screen diagonal and your viewing
Mhm.
distance. It will also tell you the field of view that you actually have, or your ideal distance to the TV in order to achieve the center seat performance in the theater.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Florian. Your website has a plethora of just really good information and some really interesting tools, like your distance calculator tool you're just mentioned. Guys,
Hmm.
you can go to Florian's website, plug in screen size, viewing distance. You can plug in a few different parameters, and it'll help you design the room and design the system so that the customer is getting kind of optimal viewing. It's an awesome calculator. It's free. You also, Florian, I want to talk a little bit too, since you've done some 8K work.
Hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about the NASA space station clips that you worked on.
Yeah, so that was that was funny. I actually used SDR material. Okay, so the original material in this case was SDR material, and I enhanced it to HDR, but it was 8K SDR. So you know, that was like a weekend project where I thought, hey, come on, there's 8K footage here, and no
Yeah,
one can play it back. So let's do something with it, make it HDR and make it playable in sorry
that's
make
great.
it make it easy to play back in your TV,
Hmm.
because you know the material that was initially there would not play in your TV.
And
And
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask if somebody wants to download those files from your
huh
website, it's just as easy as putting them on a thumb drive and popping them into the TV, right? Super
Exactly,
simple. Yeah.
exactly. So you mentioned this topic of physical media, and you're exactly right. I don't see even like from my perspective, working with some post-production houses and everything, I don't see any physical media coming up any soon. So what we have is those USB sticks, and the USB sticks actually make a lot of sense. Because yes, it's easy to update, it's
Sure.
reliable, and uh, data rate compression,
Right.
that was something you mentioned, and it's interesting because I did experiments, and we do have some data rate restrictions in the TVs right now. So all the existing 8K TVs can't handle more than, let's say, about 100 megabit data rate as a maximum, even for 8K.
Sure.
But if you compare 100 megabit 8K with 100 megabit 4K, you will find that the need for more bandwidth in 8K is not as high as you might think. It's a
Really.
similar phenomenon as going from 8-bit to 10-bit. See, I expected initially, when you go from 8-bit to 10-bit, you need a lot more data rate.
Sure. Sure.
But the reality, the reality was that it was compressing much better,
Ah,
because you had less quantization errors. And quantization errors is basically, this is basically noise, okay? And this noise is hard to compress. So I found out it basically going from 8-bit to 10-bit within the same encoding standard,
Hmm.
HEVC, it does not add up too much. Actually, it improves the encoding efficiency because the quantization errors go down.
That's
And
cool.
similar thing is happening for 8K, because realistically, you don't have images full of 8K details. You have lower resolution details, and you have less of the spatial quantization errors. So it's not as bad as you might think.
Okay, okay. If somebody was going to go to your website and download the files and play them back on a thumb drive, um,
Yes.
do you have any recommendations for like I'm assuming USB 3.0 is probably going to be, or is that more for transferring than playback? What do you think?
Well, the thing is, I'm not working with more than 100 megabits per second, and we're talking about megabit. So
Right,
we have
sure.
to divide by 8, and so actually we don't really need 3.0.
Oh, so for playback, they can use anybody can use whatever they want, pretty much. Yeah.
Basically yes, but sometimes there's a latency in reading and everything. It makes sense to figure out the best like USB stick for every TV manufacturer.
Sure.
So, but if you use like the SanDisk sticks that are easy to get, you normally don't have any issues.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I use. It's just a pretty common brand. I've never really had problems with them, and with Black Friday around the corner, if anybody needs to pick some up, it's probably a pretty good time.
Yeah,
They're
right,
so inexpensive now.
right.
Flort, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the methods of upscaling.
Hmm.
In the past, it's always been just double the pixels, or there's always been a very efficient way to upscale without taking up too much processing power. But from everything I'm reading about 8K, the upscaling in 8K is a lot smarter and a lot different than what we've seen before. And I keep seeing it called AI or artificial intelligence upscaling.
Yeah, basically the process of upscaling that needs to be done initially is like you need to do the chroma upsampling, and you need to pick a method of interpolation. You mentioned nearest neighbor, which is the worst thing to do because it's just repeating the pixels. There's also like bilinear and then bicubic and Lanxess interpolation. So we have different interpolation where the complexity is adding up because you're taking more and more pixels into account for scaling into a single pixel. But once this is done, there are also other decisions to be made, like for example adding texture or restoring edges, detecting if there are any jagged edges, for example. And we are basically, in order to appropriately upscale and remove artifacts, in order to do that with an image, we are talking about a lot of decisions. And those decisions are kind of complex, and that's where artificial upscaling is coming in. Now, interestingly, the artificial upscaling itself is not happening in the TV. Um,
Oh.
uh, so the artificial upscaling is normally at this point of time, until we have very, very powerful processing in the TVs. At this point of time, it's done on servers. So basically, TV manufacturers analyze a lot of different scenes, maybe thousands, maybe millions. We don't know. It's a black box. But they analyze many different scenes and then feed the best way of upscaling it and restoring textures and details, feed that into a database that goes into the TV. Now, the TV is basically detecting scenes or elements, picture elements, and then deciding for these picture elements how to upscale it.
And this is all
So
happening real time.
yes, it has to happen in
Wow.
real time, and things like your latency tester might
Yeah.
might be interesting. When you say, okay, we turn the AI upscaling on or off.
Yeah.
But what I would like to say is AI upscaling is not AI upscaling. So in between different manufacturers, You know, some may call AI upscaling, may
Oh,
use the term,
yeah.
but have a very simple technology behind it. So you know, we have to really analyze different scenes, and
Hmm.
this is a great field for enthusiasts. You know,
Yeah.
watching their 4K movies again, and looking at you know, how specific scenes are getting upscaled. I remember this happening on Sony projectors, right,
Hmm. Oh,
for
yeah.
upscaling. And so this, I always thought this is a funny process, finding
Yeah.
artifacts like weird faces where a third eye is appearing, or
Yeah. You
something
know what,
like
you know
that.
what it reminds me of? You always have the content that you know really well. Maybe it's a movie or a TV show, a video game, maybe it's music and it's an album, right? So I'll use music as an example. So you've had this album you've listened to a million times, you get a new pair of speakers or a new amplifier or a new pair of headphones or something, and you go back and you re-listen to everything, and you're
Yes,
like,
yes.
oh, wow, I never heard her take that breath before she started singing, or I never heard the thumbing of the guitar string. I can hear that now because I have so much more. I have much better equipment to actually hear that stuff now. And it seems like with movies, it's going to be the same. You
That's
take,
exactly right.
yeah,
I do have an 8K TV at home, and I have the exact experience that you're describing.
yeah,
I like to rewatch movies, you
sure.
know, for, you know, HDR and 8K upscaling.
Hmm.
It's just so much fun to experience it again. I'm
Yeah,
totally on your side.
they, we look at movies like, Blade Runner 2049, for example.
Yeah,
Um,
wonderful.
it looked amazing in the theater. I have it on disc. It looks great on disc, but none of us have ever seen it in its full glory yet because we've never seen it in 2020 color at 10,000 nits because we can't yet. There's no displays that can do it yet. So even a movie that already looks awesome today is going to just keep getting better and better and better in the future. So we might end up rewatching our movies every 3, 4, 5 years at this point,
Yeah.
which is totally fine with me. Totally
It's
fine with
exciting. Yes, I love it. I mean, 5 years back in time, we said, oh, we have so wonderful displays, and how can it get any better?
me. I
And now
know.
every year there's a new step,
I
and
know.
a new reason for rewatching these movies.
The example I like to use, I'll rewind the clock back to 2006 or seven, and I know you remember these days, but I had a Samsung DLP, a 50-inch Samsung DLP, and at the time a big Pioneer Elite Blu-ray player, and I'll never forget watching Planet Earth 1 on that system back then and thinking, like, this is the pinnacle of video quality. Like, it does
Right.
not get any better than this. And 2 years goes by, 4 years goes by, 10 years goes by, and we're like laughing at all that old stuff now. It's too funny.
Yes, and I can tell you from some recent productions I've joined, even like music videos, digital signage, things like that. You know, but you see images that you haven't seen before.
Right.
It's so fascinating. You know, this 8K done right is really a very surprising experience. I love it.
Cool, Florian. I can't thank you enough, man. Yeah, I could sit here and talk to you forever. But thanks for taking the time and staying
Thank
up a little
you.
later for me.
Sure.
Let's let everybody know your website, and I don't know, I forget if you want to share like your Twitter and stuff if you're doing those types of things.
Okay, so the best thing you can do is go to ff.de. So it's like Florian Friedrich, ff.de. And then there is a section in the top navigation bar that's called News Blog. And there you will find my latest article, 8K Hype or Benefit. And we have all the links in there for the calculators and, of course, for the newsletters that will send you the links for the download.
That's great, Florian. Well, I was checking to see if there was any questions for you from the audience, and I don't see any. So with that being said, have a great Thanksgiving, and thanks again, and I'm hoping to talk to you here again real soon, man.
You too. Thank you very
All right,
much for
cool.
having me.
Thanks. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Florian. Okay, cool. All right, guys. Well, that will wrap up the presentation. I do have just a couple of more slides here for you to take a look at. Give me just a moment here to reconvene. Okay, great. So thank you again to Florian. His website, it's right here. It's ff.de. If you want to go check out those NASA clips, I highly recommend it. They're free, which is always great. If you are running 8K or even 4K with HDR in somebody's home, These are great clips to show off. The black levels are really good, and you know, it's cool stuff. It's from NASA and it's from the International Space Station. If you want to learn a little bit more about what we're all about, AVPro Global, there's a few websites up on the screen for you. We've got avproedge.com. That's where you can check out all of our connectivity products. Murideo.com, got a couple of online bandwidth calculators, glossaries on audio video terms that talks all about calibration and our test equipment and HDMI troubleshooting. Bullettraincables.com is going to give you an idea of not only the HDMI cables that I pointed out before, the 48 gig ones, but we also make them in 18 gig, and then we also make you know, traditional copper-based HDMI cables as well. For information on all the classes that we either teach ourselves or we help teach around the world, visit us at avpro.training. You'll see dates and times and locations there for our 2-day class called AVPro Academy. You'll also see dates and times for the ISF classes that we do all over the place. Also the Professional Video Alliance classes from Greg Lowen, and also the HAA Home Acoustic Alliance classes from Jerry LeMay. So feel free to visit any of those websites. If you need any more information, feel free. You can always email me, jason@avproglobal.com. Before I let you guys loose, let me double check the chat box maybe one more time. And it looks like we don't have any more questions. So thanks again, guys. Have a great Thanksgiving. We may do one more webinar by the end of the year. I don't know exactly yet, but if we don't, we'll see everybody in 2020. And thanks again for everybody's support. We'll talk to you soon.